Hello, Scott. Welcome to Russia. Welcome to Yaroslav. It's a great honor having you here. If you didn't know, Scott has just finished running workshops in Moscow and running workshops in Yaroslav, and today he kindly agreed to talk to English teachers from Russia about continuing professional development. So, Scott, my first question: a lot of people can't really afford expensive courses in England or in America, and they want to benefit from free continuing professional development. Can you share some CPD activities which you can do on low or no budget?
Well, I mean, of course, it depends on your teaching context. If you're teaching on your own without benefit of colleagues, then you're disadvantaged in some ways. And I think back on my own experience when I first started teaching, I think I got all my continuous professional development was through talking to my colleagues in the staff room, preparing lessons together, sharing materials and that kind of thing. And also we had a kind of a system of observation. It wasn't peer observation, that was too difficult to arrange because it would mean taking people out of classes, but we were being observed, and so we were getting feedback on our teaching from our kind of educational superiors. If it's possible to observe other teachers, when I started observing other teachers myself, it taught me so much about teaching because it really kind of opened up my mind to realizing that there are as many different ways of teaching as there are teachers, that people adjust methods to their own, to suit their own personalities, etc. So, I mean, that's if that's possible, that's free. The other thing is, of course, reading about teaching. There's a lot of if you have access to a library or just going online. I mean, there's so much material now online, practical ideas for teaching any number of different kinds of contexts, children, adults, beginners, advanced students, and people's blogs, of course, now, which is a wonderful trove of free information. And then I think the other thing I would recommend, if you're slightly more disciplined, is keeping some kind of teaching journal or log, keeping a record, not just of what you did, but your own evaluation of how you felt the lesson went. You don't have to do this for every lesson.
So what might you include in the log?
Well, I think you'd include, for future reference, if you were happy with the lesson, include a brief description of what you did, because it's always useful. You forget lessons and you go back and think, oh, that was that fantastic lesson, let's have a look at it again. But also some kind of evaluation of its effectiveness. Don't be too hard on yourself, and also some possible pointers, some action points for future lessons, which and so what you're doing effectively is creating a kind of a cycle of doing, that is action, reflection, drawing some conclusions and planning for the next round of activity, and that is the classic reflective cycle, and that's completely free.
Coming back to observation, do you think, Scott, that teachers should be given some plans when they're going to be observed by the academic directors, or do you think they should come up with initiative and they should ask the academic directors or their colleagues, the colleagues they trust, to observe them?
I think ideally in the kind of institution, if there's that dynamic of trust between colleagues and between academic directors and teachers, then these observations should be a negotiated thing and a voluntary thing, and not just simply an inspection to see if people are kind of like, doing the right thing. I think observation can always be, particularly initially, slightly threatening, and I think academic directors need to take that on board. And even if they come in only for 5 or 10 minutes initially, just to get everybody used to the process.
Some of my colleagues who run their own schools, they think that they shouldn't tell teachers in advance that they're going to be observed, and they can just come into a class any minute and start observation. What's your idea of that? I think that's a little unfair. It has happened to me. I remember when I first started teaching, the director of the organization, I knew he was in the school I was in, but I didn't think he would come into my classroom because my classroom was behind another classroom. So to get to it, he would have to go through another classroom. So I thought, I'm safe. And then suddenly there was this knock on the door, and he came in. This was the director of the whole organization. And I was petrified. But so I think it's a little bit unfair. I think a little bit of warning is civil. And again, the notion of it being negotiated. And where I think it's important that the teacher be consulted as to what the teacher
wants the observer to look at. And if the teacher says, look, I'm having a little bit of trouble, I'm conscious that my explanations are not very clear, could you focus on that? Or I'm worried that I might be overcorrecting the students, could you focus on that in your feedback?
So are you saying that observation focus should come from the teacher?
Ideally.
That's interesting. And my next question is, we know that feedback after observation is always personal, because you tried hard, you did everything you could, but anyway you have some space for improvement. That's why it's personal. Can you give any tips for people who are given feedback, how to make it nicer, softer, less personal?
I think focusing first of all on what actually happened. So just recreating the lesson step by step as what happened, the facts of the lesson without any opinions or evaluation. So first you did this, first you did that, and then what did you do? Ah yes, that's right, and then that happened, and then that student did this, and that student did that. So we're agreed on the facts of the matter. And then I think maybe eliciting from the teacher, well, were you happy with all those stages? Is there anything you would like to change, or anything you were wondering about or puzzled about? And see what the teacher has to say, rather than going in and saying, well, I didn't think that was very good when you did this X, Y, Z kind of thing. I think, again, if we can get the teacher to say, well, and if so, I mean, okay, there are teachers who say, no, I thought it was marvellous, I thought it was fantastic, I was very happy with it. You say, yeah, okay, fine. Do you think this, then maybe draw attention to what the students were doing, or how much the students were participating. And I think teachers sometimes forget, particularly in a large class, they have kind of blind spots, for example, and they don't actually realise that that group of students over there didn't say very much, or that all the questions were addressed to that bright student in the front row. And so observational data like that, and say, well, I did notice that actually I kept a record, this is the observer, says, you didn't actually ask any questions to Sergei, for example, at the back there, so maybe next time, etc. So working from facts rather than from just opinions or emotions is very important.
Thank you. Coming back to the topic of continuing professional development, still for the majority of teachers, conferences and taking part in courses, it's an important part, a vital part of continuing professional development. Can you share any tips and recommendations as a very successful conference participant and speaker? How can we English teachers benefit more from attending conferences?
Well, it depends what kind of conference, of course. The local conferences are probably a good starting point, and they will probably address your immediate local needs. I think it's always good policy to report back to your colleagues if you've been lucky enough to go to a conference. And I think not just because of sharing the ideas, but because reporting in itself is a useful exercise as you try to condense down what may have been a 1 hour long presentation into 5 or 10 minutes. And it keeps it fresh in your own mind. I think one of the problems of conferences, I find still, as I see so many things, so many different presentations, that I come away from it kind of like, I don't even remember what that person was talking about. Or so keeping notes and reporting back to your colleagues, I think, is a good way of keeping the conference ticking over.
Thank you. And my last question. There are a lot of teachers I personally know, and they have great teaching experience, but they are somehow afraid to start creating their own materials. They're afraid to start sharing their ideas, especially at international conferences, because they're not sure that their ideas are good enough, that they're worth sharing. And on the other hand, they're confused about the context, and they think that ideas which may work in my context may not be good for international conferences. Could you somehow encourage those kind of teachers to start actually sharing their ideas because they're unique?
It's not easy. It took me a very long time before I felt ready, and even then I didn't feel ready. I was kind of pushed into giving a talk in a kind of public forum, and I was absolutely terrified. I think one of the things that you didn't mention, but I think one of the causes of fear too, is the idea that it's meant to be very theoretical and academic. Well, this is far from the truth, and people really appreciate talks which are very practical and very grounded in classroom reality, even if it's a different classroom reality. There's always be something that there will be a common ground. So I think it's very important to feel confident about what you do. If it's some techniques that you want to talk about that you found work, maybe you've got a technique for doing reading activities with young learners, fantastic. Just describe the technique. You don't have to go in with a whole lot of theoretical baggage. Just describe the technique, how you do it, where you do it, why you do it, and then throw it open for questions and answers. And people who go along to conferences are really very benign. They do not bite. In my experience, the discussions in conferences are the best part, really, the question and answer. And so, you know, it's not as difficult as you might think, as long as you're confident that your idea is a worthwhile one, and that you can describe it in terms that people will understand.
Scott, thank you very much one more time for visiting us in Moscow and in Yaroslavl, giving workshops for the Dmitry Nikitin School. And dear colleague, thank you very much for watching. Scott, thank you.
Thank you, Dmitry.
Thank you. Goodbye.